My friends, today I don't have much time, so we'll settle for a quickie. Long story short, it's just a matter of time before the fortress city of Velyka Novosilka falls into Russian hands. The situation is deteriorating quickly for the Ukrainian army in that sector. Thousands of Ukrainian soldiers face encirclement, and as we're talking now, the enemy is already at the gates.
May the force be with us.
A few moments later.
I mean, I'm not making this up. Here from the pro-Ukrainian deep state UA, they wrote extremely difficult times near Velyka Novosilka. Even the Kyiv Independent is basically saying GG, well played. Russia preparing to break through to southern Donetsk Oblast. Now it's not a surprise the AFU found itself between a rock and a hard place. Thousands of Ukrainian soldiers faced encirclement near Kurakhove. And if these positions collapsed, this would put at risk the entire Pokrovsk front. So in response, the Ukrainian command urgently transferred some of its best forces to hold the line. This worked, but due to Ukraine's severe shortage of manpower, some sectors had to be neglected. That's when the Horde turned its attention towards Velyka Novosilka, which happened to be only defended by conscripts, territorial defense guys, and National Guard units.
Pity the guardsmen.
However, listen up everyone. Since Forbes loves to quote the superior thinking of Twitter imperial warlord Andrew Perpetuin, let's see what he had to say about this battle. Losing the town of Velyka Novosilka will not in itself be that much of a disaster. In the grand scheme of things, it is just one town. My friends, the meme is real. All of a sudden, Velyka Novosilka is not a strategically important city anymore. Actually, let's compare this to what the commander of the 3rd Assault Brigade Azov had to say.
Це дуже важливий вузол оборони півдня України. Надзвичайно важливий.
It's a tough choice. Who should we trust? Okay, just to be sure, let's check Wikipedia. Velyka Novosilka is seen as a strategic point in the Donbass due to its location on higher ground close to Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Now the real drama is that Velyka Novosilka is the largest urban area in a 30-kilometer radius, and there's not a single terrain feature that can stop Russian assault detachments. So the same way the fall of the fortress of Vuhledar allowed the Russian army to advance 25 kilometers in 2 months, the fall of Velyka Novosilka could lead the Russian army all the way up to the Vovcha River, and perhaps even allow them, for the first time since the beginning of this war, to step foot into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Long story short, Velyka Novosilka is very important for Ukraine. Now, with that being said, the only thing that could save Velyka Novosilka and prevent another military debacle for our beloved Ukrainskaya Armia would be the immediate intervention of the 404th Denis Davidov Remote MacBook Air Assault Desktop Brigade.
We are winning!
Welcome to HistoryLegends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukraine war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads, so make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. To fully understand this battle, we have to start in the spring of 2024. As you can see on the map, between the 1st of May and October 1st, the Zaporizhia Front line south of Velyka Novosilka barely changed. It's really the fall of Vuhledar and the cavalry-like charge that followed, which flipped the script. Within a couple weeks, everything changed.
Say hello to my little friend!
By the end of October, the Russian army had already pushed a good 10 kilometers beyond the fortress of Vuhledar, and their spearheads were penetrating deeper and deeper into enemy rears. By the 28th of October, Russian Marines of the 40th Naval Infantry Brigade from the Far East captured half the settlement of Shartarsky. On November 2nd, the Ukrainians abandoned ship. Here you can see how Russian soldiers celebrated their victory by raising the flag of the Marine Corps and the flag of the Russian Federation. Here you can see one of the many Ukrainian POWs that were captured during this battle. You know morale is high when you have guys that come all the way from Kamchatka just to clap some Ukrainian cheeks. By the way, if you remember, these Russian Marines from the 40th Brigade were involved in the defense of Uruzhaine during the 2023 summer counteroffensive. Here you can see how the Russian Marines of the Pacific Fleet ambushed a Ukrainian column. The Russian Marines engaged another of these columns, as you can see in this video. After retreating kilometers and kilometers, 1 year later, they're about to regain all the ground they have lost. By the 5th of November, everything indicated that the Russian army would push north and essentially leave Velyka Novosilka for later. And that's essentially what I told you in my last video. However, the tactical situation has changed. Like I told you earlier, a lot of elite Ukrainian units were sent in that sector to hold the line. Additionally, if we zoom in, we could already notice how combat operations started to shift west of Chartarske. For example, here you can see drones of the Ukrainian Shadow unit harassing Russian riflemen at nighttime as they pushed out of Chartarske. If we look at it on the map, the Russian infantry squads were hit along this tree line. From there, if we analyze possible courses of action, Russian assault squads could push in this direction and zigzag their way from one tree line to another towards Razdolne. Or they could push southwards and leapfrog their way towards Velyka Novosilka. Imagine you're part of the HQ of the Ukrainian command in the Yuzhno-Donetskaye Направление, the South Donetsk direction. As part of the HQ, you only have limited reserves available. Your number one mission is to protect Pokrovsk. But then you have this massive cauldron that is forming, where thousands of your men are at risk of being cut off and encircled. That's the immediate danger to take care of. So that's where you send most of your reserves. Then you have this 40-kilometer front line to protect around Velyka Novosilka, a very important defensive node which connects the Donbass and Zaporizhia fronts. Since that sector was considered to be calm, it ended up being defended mostly by territorial defense battalions filled with conscripts, supported by part of the presidential brigade to keep everything tight. To make matters even worse, by the 10th of November, the front started brewing north of Staromayorsk. In this Ukrainian footage, you can see drones harassing Russian infiltration units, but it seems they are acting alone without any major artillery support. 24 hours later, Russian assault squads broke through and pushed 2.5 kilometers to the north towards Rivnopil, while a second grouping gained 1.5 kilometers towards Novodarivka. Now, if these settlements sound familiar to you, it's because those were the first villages to be liberated by Ukraine during the 2023 summer counteroffensive. 42 recorded losses just in that part of the front. The immediate effect of a shortage of riflemen for the AFU was that the front line became extremely porous. There were so many gaps in the line. During this battle, Russian recon units were detected and targeted by the Ukrainians in this sector, multiple kilometers beyond the contact line east of Novopil. Now we know this because this Russian drone tried to strike a Ukrainian helicopter operating in the sector, before being jammed by the helicopter's electronic warfare capabilities. But before that happened, we see the helicopter firing missiles at the tree lines, thus indicating the presence of enemy elements. Additionally, men of the 60th Motorized Rifle Brigade advanced 700 meters north of Staromayorsk and raised the Russian flag on this farm complex. This would be the perfect stepping stone before launching the attack on Makarivka. So from that moment on, we see that the Russians were starting this major flanking maneuver from the western side of Velyka Novosilka, combined with an attack in the center to pin down as many Ukrainian forces as possible. The next day, on the 12th of November, Russian forces made additional gains west of the hamlet of Novodarivka after securing this tree line, but failed to consolidate their gains near Novopil. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drone operators harassed enemy forces around Levadine. The operation increased in intensity on the 13th of November, when Russian forces of the 37th Motor Rifle Brigade entered the arena in the sector of Novodonetsk. In a way, it was nothing major for the Ukrainian command, but at the same time you could feel that the Russian army was shaping the battlefield for the next push. The next day, on the 14th of November, Russian troops pushed 1,600 meters north of Rivnopil, thus securing the farmstead. Here you can see men of the 5th Guards Tank Brigade raising the white-blue-red flag on the settlement. 24 hours later, they had mopped up Ukrainian positions on the western side of the village. From that moment on, all quiet on the South Donetsk front. No major territorial changes could be reported for the next 3-4 days. The Ukrainian command could finally breathe. They had avoided the nightmare scenario.
But not for long!
On the 1st of November, assaulted detachments of the 40th Naval Brigade captured Miamalkova. Whoops, wrong tab, I mean Yasna Polyana. After a tactical pause of 2 weeks, instead of pushing northwards, Russian forces suddenly turned to the west and advanced 1,700 meters towards Razdolny. Here you can even see one of their mortars that provided suppressive fire during the attack. Now if we stop right at this frame, we can even see the shell that they were firing. It's a 120mm round, while the OF prefix stands for Askolokno Fugasnai, or High Explosive Fragmentation Round, most specifically an OF-843B mortar bomb. In turn, the mortar that they're operating is most likely a Soviet-era 120mm 2B11 Sani, which has a maximum range of 7,000 meters. What's interesting is that, according to estimates, the 40th Naval Infantry Brigade would typically field 2 mortar batteries. One mortar battery equipped with 8 120mm mortars nicknamed the Girth Masters, and another battery with smaller caliber mortars. I'm actually curious if you are a mortar operator. Please let me know in the comment section how these mortars work and how you organize a mortar strike. The more detailed, the better. Now further south, this entire sector came under the gray zone. Right here, 6.5 kilometers east of Velyka Novosilka, in a tree line codenamed Azimut. A recon group of 5 Russian riflemen were brought on the contact line with a BMP. And we even have a detailed account of what happened to them. Right after exiting the BMP, they came under enemy fire. Due to the intensity of the fire, they estimated the enemy force in front of them to be composed of 15 people, who reportedly shouted in a foreign language. What we know for sure is that the firefight was short and brutal. 3 enemy soldiers were KIA and another was seriously wounded. The Russian assault squad then pushed on, as friendly drones hovered above their positions and harassed enemy troops. Reportedly, the drones targeted 7 enemy soldiers. But at that moment, everyone in the Russian recon squad was wounded. The commanding officer of the unit, a lieutenant with the call sign Mariak or Sailor, immediately called for an evacuation. A vehicle eventually came to pick up the wounded, but the lieutenant stayed behind to cover the withdrawal of his men. At dawn, a recon unit of 3 Ukrainian soldiers approached his position, but they ended up being ambushed by the lieutenant and all the drones flying around them. Eventually, reinforcements arrived and the lieutenant was evacuated on a motorcycle. So that was the story as it was reported. Now, from what I can tell you in the actual drone footage, they only showcased 5 to 6 Ukrainian fatalities. This goes to show that in the heat of the moment, it often happens that you overestimate enemy forces. And we also see the Russian obsession with foreign language units to prove to themselves that they're actually fighting NATO. Now if we zoom out, the Ukrainian garrison of Velyka Novosilka was getting encircled via a double envelopment by the Russian army. A dangerous maneuver because, as you know, never let the 2 tips touch.
Pity the guardsmen.
However, that's when on the 20th of November, the Russian grouping in the center broke through, with its storm detachments pushing 3.5 kilometers out of Novodonetsk. Meanwhile, further north, the Marines were racing towards Razdolny. Not even 24 hours later, it's the entire sector west of Zolota Niva that was falling apart. What's crazy to me is that if we actually look at the strength of the Russian grouping, the Russian armed forces don't have that many formations deployed in that sector. The ratio of forces between the Russians and the Ukrainians is probably close to 1-to-1. But the real disaster happened the next day on the 22nd of November. The Russian Marines from the Far East gained 5.5 kilometers west of Shakhtarsky and harassed the Ukrainian defensive bastions with swarms of FPV drones. In this footage, we see a Ukrainian tank targeted multiple times by FPV drones along a road, while a second one fired on Russian positions before being destroyed in open field. On the map, using geolocation, the first tank was hit right here, almost 6 kilometers from the contact line. Now if we take into account the max range of the average FPV drone, the Russian drone operators behind these strikes were most likely positioned somewhere along these tree lines. Whereas for the second tank, it was destroyed much closer to the actual area of operations. More importantly, from an operational perspective, we can speculate that most Ukrainian reserves, including their armored units, are located around Bahatur, as well as around Alexivka, and from there they're being dispatched southwards towards Razdolny. Meanwhile, the Russian grouping in Zolota Niva advanced 3 kilometers along the TO509 road leading straight towards Velyka Novosilka. And if you remember from my previous videos, that was one of the scenarios that I laid out to you. However, if we analyze the speed at which the Russian army is pushing westwards, this could indicate that their true objective is Velyka Novosilka, especially if combined with the current Russian operations in the sector of Staromayorsky. From a tactical perspective, what happened is that on the 19th of November, Russian scouts secretly crossed the Kachlahach River, infiltrated enemy lines, and secured a position in one of the tree lines right in the middle of a Ukrainian defensive perimeter. So when the main assault was launched, the Ukrainians thought the enemy was already in their back, and they quickly abandoned all their combat outposts. Now what's interesting to me is that the Ukrainians pulled the same moves on the Russians in 2022, when it was the Russians that lacked manpower. This move in the east should have been combined with a deep thrust from Rivnopil, but the Ukrainians released the biggest loads on this Ukrainian attack force and halted their attack. As you can see in this video, there's one abandoned tank here, but we don't know if it's Russian or Ukrainian. But then Ukrainian FPV drones focused their attention on these two turtle tanks, which are definitely Russian. There's also an abandoned pickup truck nearby, most likely a Ukrainian one destroyed during a supply run. That's how Deep State UA described the situation at the end of the 22nd of November. 5 enemy armored vehicles attacked Velyka Novosilka directly. Another 2 pushed south of Razdolny, and at least 6 Russian armored vehicles managed to land their infantry component right inside Razdolny proper. At the same time, they explained how the Russians moved along the main road west of Shakhtarsk using ATVs and light vehicles. Now from Zolota Niva, a column of several armored vehicles led by a tank landed their infantry 3 kilometers east of this farm complex near Velyka Novosilka. With that being said, the Ukrainians, although suffering from a lack of armored vehicles and being outgunned, they're fighting like devils. At one instance, it was reported that 3 Ukrainian soldiers held their trench by themselves for 2 hours until the last. Not far from there, another group of 6 fought heroically for their position until the end. After these reports, we could believe that the Ukrainian command transferred a number of solid reinforcements towards Velyka Novosilka in support of all the territorial defense battalions. By the 23rd of November, Russian assault detachments got a foothold inside Razdolny, and half the settlement was now inside the grey zone. The danger was that if the village fell into enemy hands, the Ukrainians would effectively lose control over the TO518 road, which acted as their MSR main supply route, leaving only the small country road going along the Mokry River to maintain communication and supplies flowing. That same day, the Russian grouping along the TO509 road advanced 3 kilometers and captured one building out of this farm complex, located southeast of Velyka Novosilka. We even got a glimpse as to how the Russian 37th Motor Rifle Brigade led the assault. We got this Ukrainian footage from the 3rd Mechanized Battalion and 20th Battalion of Special Forces of the Presidential Brigade. We see multiple FPV drone strikes on MTLBs equipped with cages and covered with camouflage nets. Additionally, the army group of the Ukrainian 17th Poltava Brigade of the National Guard joined the battle to repel this Russian attack. It was a real gangbang. I don't know, sounds better in Ukrainian. In total, about 4 to 6 Russian armored vehicles were destroyed or abandoned, including 1 tank, and the rest were all MTLBs. That's almost the entire attack force gone, wiped out. From a 3D perspective, here's the farm complex with all its hangars east of Velyka Novosilka. The Russian army column pushed diagonally across this field, and then they drove along the tree line. That's where the first drone strikes happened. Then we see that one of the infantry fighting vehicles disembarked their rifleman component right at this spot. Each one of these MTLBs can carry up to 11 passengers, and that's about the size of the unit we can see being disembarked. So that vehicle that is now empty returned to the rear, while the other one still full of infantrymen continued ahead towards the farm. But that's where they were stopped by all the drones and possibly minefields. So from a tactical perspective, despite the fact that there was a lot of burnt steel, the Russians effectively got control of this area. And if that wasn't enough, there is footage of Ukrainian drone operators harassing Russian infantrymen using a mounted gun on the drone. Now my friends, this is dystopian AF. By the 24th of November, Russian recon units pushed towards Novopil. But that was nothing compared to the fact that the entire eastern flank of Velyka Novosilka crumbled under the weight of enemy attacks. Russian assault detachments advanced 3.5 kilometers along this tree line, and further south, this farm complex had fallen into Russian hands. Even more dramatic, forward elements of the 5th Guards Tank Brigade were spotted right here in this mining complex, 1,000 meters away from the first building of Velyka Novosilka.
We have captured a building, my lord!
In this video, we see 3 vehicles drive at full speed across fields, along a path that was carefully demined. And after the cut, we see Russian soldiers starting to occupy some trenches, underground positions, a bunker, and this entire set of buildings. This strategic, highly fortified outpost was simply abandoned by Ukrainian soldiers. The next day, on the 25th, Ukrainian forces abandoned most of the village of Razdolny. The Russian army was one step closer to the encirclement of the garrison of Velyka Novosilka. On the 26th of November, most of the settlement had been mopped up by the Russian forces. The only position still in Ukrainian control was this large trench bastion located on the road, 800 meters west of Razdolny. Now, what can we expect from this part of the front in the next few days and weeks? Well, according to video evidence, Russian drones are already harassing Ukrainian vehicles inside Velyka Novosilka, which will make the defense of the city and the resupplying of the garrison extremely difficult. Additionally, the Ukrainians have lost this farm complex, and most likely this mining site turned into a fortified outpost as well. It's just a matter of time before the first Russian storm detachments reach the first houses of Velyka Novosilka in the north with the fall of Razdolny. This Ukrainian MSR is about to be physically cut at 2 locations. Meanwhile, this other one along the Mokry River will be unusable due to the close proximity of enemy troops. This means the only supply road left will be this one, which depends on 2 bridges to supply the eastern side of Velyka Novosilka. Even then, forward elements of the Russian army are only 4 kilometers away from that road as well. From the perspective of the Ukrainian command, we could ask ourselves, is this city even worth defending at all? Considering that this sector is mostly defended by low-quality troops. It's not their fault, but you can't expect much from these guys. In my opinion, the Ukrainian army will try to engage in a rearguard battle in that part of the front. Ukrainian regulars will have to counterattack and hold long enough to allow all the men trapped in this cauldron east of the river to be evacuated in an organized way. Perhaps after that, the Ukrainian command will prefer to withdraw to the next line of fortifications, set along the line Vilny Pole up to the Mokry River. And then there's the following one located 4 kilometers to the north, but again without enough infantry units to man the trenches, and without adequate artillery support. It's unsure how long these positions can be held. The problem is that at this rate, once Velyka Novosilka falls, the Russians will turn this urban settlement into a massive logistics center that will springboard their next offensives. By the end of December, the Russians could have reached all the way to the Vovcha River. And as part of the art of war, this will open a lot of possibilities to the Russian command. They could flank Pokrovsk from the west, flank the entire Ukrainian defensive lines in Zaporizhia from the east, or they could even start pushing towards Dnipropetrovsk Oblast and try to reach for Pavlohrad. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.